Welcome to the Mentoring Triangle at London County, and today Steve Turner and I are joined by my good friend Paul Sampson, the former England Rugby International, who has kindly agreed to share his journey through sport. Paul, welcome.
Pleasure. I have to start by saying that when you asked me to meet you in a boxing ring and you wanted to film it, this isn't quite what I had in mind. But it's always a pleasure to see you, Neil. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much. We do appreciate you giving the time, and it personally a lovely opportunity to meet someone who I've watched on the TV and whose career I've followed, and it would just be a privilege for us to learn from you and to share with people how you got started in your rugby career, especially as I have in mind that you're a pretty fast man on the track as well.
Yeah. Well, you used to be. I'm too scared of going back to find out. Given my age now, but no, the foundations for my career were set a long time before I knew I was going to be a rugby player. My uncle played for Wakefield Trinity when they were the best team in rugby league, and he reached a Challenge Cup final and won and scored a try at Wembley, and really my background was. In terms of my family, was rugby league. My cousin Denise, she ran in the Montreal Olympics in '76. I think it was the third leg that she ran in the relay. So that was the athletics. That's where the interest came. And I think I was at my first school. Sport wasn't part of the curriculum, and I think really parents knew I had a level of energy that wasn't being used, and I think they played a masterstroke in terms of giving me the opportunity and somehow made ends meet and got me to a private school where sport was a major part of the curriculum. Right. So things sort of led on from there. I was always fast, and then with my cousin, Dean Sampson, he played very high level in rugby league, most of his career at Castleford, and sort of going to watch him from a very early age, seeing the crowds, really sort of experiencing rugby league, which was a very different game than it is today. But I just got a tremendous buzz from it. I remember watching his first, I forget whether it was his first game or his first try, but I remember like it was yesterday, the sense of elation and pride that I had for him scoring his try in front of thousands of people down in Castleford. And I guess that's where the seed was planted, I guess. Just, then I grew up in a place called Bingley in West Yorkshire, which has a very good rugby union junior setup, had and still does. So I was introduced to that, and alongside the rugby was always the athletics for as long as I can remember. So one fed the other, and I wanted a piece of whatever Dean was having, and you quickly realised that with your speed and exposure to all these this sort of environment, that you might be showing promise. And it was from a very early age, I think, as I just mentioned, being given the opportunities, being surrounded by high achievers, and having dedicated parents.
When did you first realise that maybe I can be more than just quick and good?
I think my father realised it a long time before I did. He had an uncanny knack of predicting the future in terms of my career and telling me that, and it was telling me, because sometimes you do need telling as a youngster, but I believed him as well. It's difficult to say. He had an uncanny knack of predicting my successes, and if it was another kid that was down at the training at the track in Wakefield, it's Wakefield Harriers, he'd say, you know, maybe not next year, but the year after you'll beat him. This is a bigger lad. He may have matured sooner, but he knew how hard I trained, and he kept getting these predictions right, and that's the fuel that fed the fire.
Right.
And it was these little successes along the way.
And it was both his judgment and a belief in you.
Absolutely, judgment, belief, and continuously getting it right, but realistic goals. You know, he didn't just try and appease a situation if things weren't going right by saying, "You'll go and do this." I don't know. I read I went through some highs and lows as a young kid with injuries and different things, and thinking I may be better than I was, and you know, he seemed to restore the faith tremendously well. My mum was slightly more pessimistic. I suppose that's where the balance was, but it was an interesting journey, and he did it for as long as I can remember, right up until maybe when I was 18. He predicted I'd get my first England cap before my 21st birthday, and I think it was by 12 days.
Wow.
He got it right. So you know, it's that was important to me.
I'd love to know post kind of 21, but just before you leave talking about your father, the way you talk about it, it sounds as though he gave you something that sort of anchored you. Your highs and lows, injuries and that sort of thing. And young men, you can get maybe off track a bit. But he, with the way he parented you, led you, was able to give you something, you know, to anchor yourself when time was difficult. Have I misheard that?
No, that's absolutely right. I think if he had nothing to say, it was the fact that he was just there. And when I say there, I mean he was picking me up from school, having done rugby training at school, picking me up to then take me all the way from Bradford down to Wakefield to train on the track at 6:30 for an hour and a half, whatever. And then we'd be travelling from Wakefield all the way back to Halifax. And this was at a time, we wouldn't have missed a session, but this was at a time where his business was struggling. And no, at the time you don't appreciate the sacrifices that he and my mum would have made, but you know, I don't know, you kind of know that there's something special, a special bond. And I think then with the appreciation obviously comes sometimes later as you get older, but it was just continuous, and that was the anchor, and you felt that you owed him it. You owed him the sessions, because there were certain sessions that you wouldn't feel like training. He'd get you to the track, he'd take the flak, and then you'd get home and you'd realise, right, that's where someone else may not have trained. He'd have me out, you know, he'd have me out on New Year's Day, on Christmas Day, just to prove that point. But I enjoyed it. You know, training was never, it just became a way of life, and it wasn't. So within a way of life there, you're going to have good days and bad, and more good days.
But I've interrupted your story. Say a bit more about...
So, went to a very good school, Bronte House School in Bradford. And then, the speed was paying off, and I was breaking records on the track, and breaking try-scoring records. And then I went down to Bronte House is a feeder school for Woodhouse Grove School, which I'm enjoying some great success of late on the rugby field, I'm proud to say. And like anything else, you start getting one or two rugby league clubs sniffing around when I was 15, 16. And obviously then, as rugby union was due to turn professional, my dad advised me to stay on at school another year and wait for it to turn professional, and that's when I joined London Wasps. At the time I was playing 1 week for Otley, some senior rugby, with Nigel Melville, the ex-England scrum half, that then went on to Wasps. And then alternate weeks I was playing for school. So I was getting some good experience in senior rugby, as well as keeping school happy playing for them. And I have to thank Woodhouse Grove School for allowing me that opportunity, because it was massively key in terms of my development. It took me till I was 17 to start showing real, not promise as such. I was never big enough really, so I was a late developer, and that was a massively crucial time because that was another prediction from my dad.
Right.
Because he knew that I would catch up in terms of my development. If he knew that I was training just as hard, if not harder, and I was training when I was 15 and 16 when I missed out on that England under 16s, which was seemed a devastating blow at the time. He got me down to Keighley Cougars to train with the first team.
Right.
And that was all the fitness, that was all the rugby drills, and so I was working on my skills, and I was just, you know, as fit as a 15, 16-year-old schoolboy could be, with the athletics thrown in as well, some winter training, the long stuff, the 300 metres in the dark and the rain. It was character building. So, Dad was well on top of it, and then when it came round to sort of when I was 17, I was getting picked for England schools, and the interesting time, really on reflection, was when I was just about to hope after an England trial for the under-18s, was when Jack Rowell called me into the full England setup to train with them prior to a Welsh game for what was then the Five Nations. And it's a long time ago, and that was a huge, it was big news, it was a big shock.
What was your experience of that? Was it kind of, wow, this is scary and I'm not ready for this, or wow, this is great, I want to be a part of this, or perhaps it was a different
I think it was a bit of both. I think you can't, I'd be lying if I said you wouldn't enjoy it, because you know, it's every schoolboy's dream to be invited into a full England squad. I think, you know, thinking back, I was nowhere near prepared for it. And why would I be? You know, there was, you'd have many agents turn up, but I was scared of it. I was scared of the whole agent thing. I was scared of, you know, I was just used to dealing with Dad. And he'd make the decisions, and so far I'd got it all right. I think by that point I was pretty set on the union.
Okay.
Not forgetting, and with all due respect to rugby league, I wanted the prestige of the rugby union world, and maybe playing at Twickenham. Jonathan Davis had been to union and gone to league, so I always thought that was an opportunity that I might explore later on. So what happened after that? So rugby league, Wigan were very keen, Leicester Tigers were very keen, Widnes were very keen, and all these clubs, Bath, but I did eventually choose to go with London Wasps, with Nigel Melville, somebody that I knew that had promised me the opportunities which he gave me. Prior to that, I was faced with a big decision. And always big decisions are very exciting, but it was athletics or rugby. I'd just won the English schools in a personal best time, 10:4, and that was considered quick enough. But I was offered money to play rugby, and I think my real heart of hearts was in rugby. And the way I had to make the decision was, well, what could I imagine never lacing up again? Was it spikes? Or was it rugby boots? And I think, you know, it was probably the right decision.
You went with your gut?
I did. And obviously then probably what my family had done, and you know, in terms of seeing Dean, and that's what really floated my boat. I wasn't around to see my cousin winning the Olympics, but it was before my time. But you know, that's sort of what I wanted, and I like the fact that every rugby game was different, rather than just what I did enjoy. And I think it served me well at certain times in my career, is that winning the English schools, I did that by myself. I had a great coach and a guy called Brad McStravitt up in Leeds at Carnegie, and that sort of personal achievement was something that I'll never forget. I've experienced that, and to what, you know, my mum was high jumper. When she was at school, she won the English schools as well. And she used to go at me in a friendly way and say, well, you know, you played for England under-18s, but you're not an English schools winner yet. So when I won this was this was great within the family, but, you know, I was beating, you know, lads that were quick, lads that have gone on to have a career in athletics. But I was very, very proud of that win, because it was me and my dad and me and my mum, but I was on the track and I'd done the hard work. Very different to that team environment.
And I think you're going to go on and say that you like something about the team environment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And is it false to compare the two, or is it because even in a team environment you have to perform individually, or do you actually feel that the pressure's off you a bit in a team environment? How is it different for you?
No, you don't feel the pressure's off, but I think it's very different. I just your mind would spin straight back to the dark nights when you win a competition and it's on your own. You're training on your own. It's all the work that's gone before. It's motivating yourself when it's really, really hard for whatever reason that contributes to that win. You know, it's not the win on the day. It's not just your performance on the day.
Sure.
It's the hard work and the hard yards that have gone in before, and those are the things that you know remain fresh in your memory when you do get a big win like that. Like that was for me. You know, my school were very proud, and yeah, that was a big deal. And I honestly, people say to me, "What was one of your fondest career memories?" And although it wasn't a career as such, that is one of my
a real highlight.
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the things you just touched on there was sort of career highlights. I think probably the most fascinating thing for me about Samo's story is he shared at one of our London County Captains' days was his real sense of joy and pride in terms of representing England at rugby and playing at Twickenham, and the achievement of a sort of schoolboy dream. But the fact that he's come to understand that it's not about getting a cap, it's about how many caps you get and what you actually achieve at that level. And I think the most fascinating thing for me about Samo's story is there was so much that was expected so young, and so much happened so young. It's about dealing with the fact that it didn't quite turn out as you'd envisaged or as you'd like it to. So perhaps you just share a little bit about that England career and then that trip to Australia and then obviously missing out on the World Cup.
That's it. Well, I don't know whether my athletics experience contributed, because I worked so hard for many years, and then once I'd won the English schools, I had to make a decision to say, right, well, that's that done now. My journey up to rugby, I almost felt the Wasps, you know, I was playing in the Wasps first team the day I arrived. I'd achieved that happened, and then when I did eventually I was still only 20, got the first team cap, the England first, my first cap. I probably wasn't aware of the hard work it took to remain there.
Okay.
And that's a failing on my part. I think I was looking for the relief rather than continuation.
Yes, like you hit that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I don't think I've ever been one that would have been criticised for work ethic, and I take my athletics experiences from that. That's why those two experiences are so different. But certainly in terms of understanding what was then required, maybe I think that's a personal failing, and certainly didn't get blasé. I wanted to train. Rugby was going through an interesting time, not long being professional, and I'd say the first person that I really respected as a rugby player because he took it on himself and started to change things, was Johnny Wilkinson.
Right.
And but I had a couple of years on him. So whilst we were all questioning whether he was sane or not, he was doing the right things, and I think rugby's changed as a result of sort of his approach.
That dedication,
Absolutely.
single-mindedness.
Yeah, absolutely. Not saying that the players weren't doing it. They were, but just in a different way to what I was doing. I just wanted to keep my speed, and certain coaches said, "You're not an athlete anymore, you're a rugby player." But I understood how important it was to keep my speed. That's why I signed rugby terms, because of my speed and hopefully skill levels and try scoring ability. But speed was important. But my England career was a difficult one. My first cap was in must have been 3-4 inches of water in South Africa. Clive would ask me if I was ready, and what else was I going to say? Absolutely. So it wasn't a sunny day at Twickenham, where the team were were on flying form. This was at the back end of the Tour of Hell, and I'd had I think we'd had about 3 or 4 weeks off pre-season of the off-season, and they got struck with a couple of injuries. This was after the disappointment of not being on the tour in the first place, which I felt I deserved at the time. But back in those days, in the off-season, you had an off-season. You went away as much as possible. You weren't looking after yourself. You weren't given programs as such. Nowadays, you're told if you're in a wider squad or expected to remain fit, just in case you're expected to join a tour squad. So I wasn't fit, but I wasn't going to turn the opportunity down. But it wasn't the experience I'd hoped for, and I actually felt less prepared in many ways than I did when I looked after myself. Be that for athletics, be that for rugby with my dad. If I was given any inkling that there was a chance for my first England cap, I'd have been the one that was training. But I did what a lot of other players did, and if that was to have an off season, I'd probably do that better than.
Because that's the environment you were in. You thought you would.
That's what you do. It's what everyone else was doing. So, but it wasn't quite the experience I'd hoped for. But again, it was a first cap, and sadly, I broke my leg jumping off a wall no higher than that rope, and it just didn't look good on paper. So, again, it was phenomenal an experience. It was the first cap.
Roll on the tape. How did your career after that first cap? How did it develop?
Injuries. The leg recovered. A broken leg's not an issue really, as long as you get it fixed correctly. So there was quite a few injuries. I never seemed to have the sort of fluidity, and I don't know. It just never went as swimmingly as I'd hoped. I was still getting picked, and on breaking the leg, it gave. Wasps weren't having the best of times, and I'll talk about a friend who won't mind me saying, but I think he was on his way out of Wasps, Kenny Logan, and because I broke my leg, he stayed, and then it seemed that he picked his form up as a result. So I was then constantly battling with Kenny, who went on to get a lot of caps, and then he started kicking goals, and I couldn't believe it, and he was kicking them as well. So then I was sort of, because of this broken leg, it quickly became a much bigger competition than ever before, and never been shy of competition, but this was something that I felt I was taking personally. This is not how I planned it. This is I'm supposed to be just able to show my skills, and then you get in, and You know, this.
Is this
I found
your
it difficult.
first real challenge like that? You don't
Yeah,
come
probably.
injuries before,
Yeah.
and that goes with being an athlete. But
Absolutely.
there's something about the way you describe this situation as being really quite challenging. There's a
Yeah.
look in your face as
Yeah.
you remember that time.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think, but it isn't a challenge really. That's real life. That's real sport. But the way that I was handling it
Right.
became a huge challenge because I felt out of control.
Yeah.
And rather than, you know, somebody else with a different personality just go, you get your head down and crack on. This is one of the highs and the lows. And, you know, I think Dad would have done his best, parents would have done their best to advise. But this wasn't for them anymore now.
No.
You know, I don't know how they could have contributed.
Give us sorry, a bit intrusive, but give us an idea. What was the kind of script almost, the kind of words that were going through your head at that time? Can you remember back when you were maybe doubting yourself or finding it really difficult? What was going through your mind then?
It was just, you said it, doubting myself, confusion, and dealing with personalities as well. You know, having to work with other people under that strain.
Right.
Everything's great when everything's going forward.
Yes.
But having to work with people and listen to coaches when you're not getting the rub of the green. I found that very difficult because often, you know, coaches are human beings. They change their behaviour as well.
Right.
If I'm sensitive to that, and players, young players are sensitive to that. Some are more than others.
Yes.
But you're just expected to then fall in
Right.
and just carry on as normal. Some players do it well, some players don't. But, you know.
Was there anybody around at that time who, you're a sensitive guy, was anybody who could see that you were a sensitive person? Who there's nobody you could...
No, not at all. Trying to think, no, you'd sort of run it by the lads and you'd go for something to eat and you'd air your opinions as you do in a team sport. Some lads not getting it their way either, but you're all in the same boat. But if you are more sensitive, you go away and you think about it for longer.
And you just play it over and over, don't you?
And I think probably, I don't know if it's rugby and at the time, so there wasn't a lot of experience within the sport in the professional era. Also, you know, who do we turn to? Everyone, rugby was just trying its hand at certain things, seeing what worked for professionalism, what didn't. And yeah, I think we're sort of, there's more done nowadays to help players cope with pressures of sport.
Sure.
And there probably wasn't as much, well, wasn't as much then. So it was difficult in many ways.
Yeah.
I'll accept that. Other players weren't, but some of us are better at dealing with you know, the pressures of sport. And if you have a coach that doesn't, you know, respond in a way that you think he should, or the way that he had done before,
Yes.
some players can take that very personally. You know.
I mean, I don't know if we've got time to explore it a bit, but if you could have described the person who you would have liked to have worked with you at that time, you could describe the characteristics and how they would have...
I think somebody that's been there before, but there wasn't anybody
Right.
professional rugby at that time. I don't think really I had a rugby, as I just mentioned about Johnny. There were no real role models in rugby union at the time. My role models were rugby league players and athletes. I did look up to, I think one of the first players I looked up to on the field, but we didn't know much about him off the field, was Christian Cullen, the fullback.
Oh, yes. New Zealand.
That's right. And I wanted to play like him. I even shaved my head. So that's, you know, players had an influence in terms of on the field.
Yes.
But off the field, who are you to be like and who are you to learn from?
Sure.
So, you know, I find it interesting now watching young players, seeing how they're dealing with it. And I think there's a lot more setups, such as what, you know, the sort of kind of thing that Neil does.
But you must look at Jack Rowell on the right wing,
Yeah.
a young man,
That's right.
and think, well, actually, that was me
Yeah,
a while back.
that's right. I think there's definitely more set up nowadays. There's people are more aware. I think they have to be. The pressures are greater. I say the pressures
Jack
are greater.
Noel,
but
sorry, not Rowell.
yes, yeah. But yeah, I wish I'd have had something and someone like
Yeah.
a Neil to say, well, what does happen now? And if someone was to just say, this is normal,
Yeah.
this is what happens. I always knew I had to go and train harder, but that didn't supplement the.
Sure.
That came easy. I could train harder. That was the easy bit. It was the psychological effects
Sure.
that I struggled with.
Roll it on a bit for us. If you looked over the years after that, what would you look to as key points in your career?
Well, as with every young player at the time, we were trying to look forward towards the 2003 World Cup. I figured that I wasn't getting any love at London Wasps, and I felt that Kenny Logan wasn't playing as well as he could, but was getting repeated opportunities to redeem himself the week after.
Right.
And it came to a bit of a head, and I said to Nigel Melville, I want to go and play rugby league. This was for a couple of reasons. Always had the desire to go and give it a go, having seen my family and obviously grown up watching it. I always knew I had to and wanted to do that. I played rugby league on a Sunday. It wasn't brand new to me. I played as a junior. So I wanted to do that, but also it was sort of running away a little bit, I guess, because things weren't going. I mean, I'm being completely realistic in that I knew I was being denied the opportunities that I should have been at Wasps at this time.
Yeah.
For whatever reasons. Kenny, had just signed another deal for 3 years, and I thought, well, I can't possibly. If I have the opportunity to go, I've got to go. So a couple of league clubs were showing their interest, so I went and signed a 2-year deal in the Super League, which turned into one. A shame that Wakefield Wildcats hit hard times, and well, I'll come to that. But prior to that, I was enjoying the experience. Again, I was surprised at our coach lasted about 8 games before he was fired. First game we beat Leeds Rhinos at Leeds, and we thought on paper our team could be contenders for a Super League title. We had some phenomenal players, likes of the late Steve Prescott, Bobby Goulding, Martin Marcella, Francis Cummins, Francis Stevenson. There was a whole host of great players, possibly towards back end of their careers, but this was an opportunity, and I enjoyed it, but again, it wasn't quite as professional as I had expected.
Yeah.
The training techniques were, I'd say certainly the gym work wasn't where London Wasps was.
Right.
It wasn't as cutting edge, it wasn't as, so that the theories weren't as recent or as new. It was hard work. The training was old school, but I was fine with that. I enjoyed that. I was probably the fittest I was ever by the time I came back to uni. So London, I left there as the club's top try scorer.
Confidence restored?
Confidence restored. Fitness was through the roof.
Right.
So I came back to London Wasps. Just by chance there had been an injury. I was watching it on television. We'd been told by Wakefield Wildcats that that if we could find other clubs to go and see the
alleviate financial burden for them.
Absolutely. So I saw the injury happen on television in a game, and quickly made contact with Nigel Melville, who gave me a lifeline, really, in a way, because we didn't leave on the best of terms. I just wanted to get away and play rugby again, and seek this new challenge. So he took me on again, and I was pretty much in the first team straight away. But I've never exactly. But I've never felt that the game had come so easy. I think because the fitness that I gained in that 1 year, and almost I've never felt as excited to be playing rugby again. An opportunity to regain any respect from the Wasp players.
Yeah.
Should any of them have sort of thought, well, you left us once, you know, now you're back, we're going to have this again. It's an opportunity to get their respect was what really drove me to perform well. And I ended up Premiership's top try scorer that year. So I remember finishing games, one in particular against Swansea. I scored 2 tries. I remember finishing the game thinking I could now play this game again because I felt so fit. The game came easy. The bounce of the ball, hitting gaps at the right time, hitting lines, really similarly to the England schools experience. This was just like I was floating on a cloud, and that's how the game felt.
And it came about in such a random way. That's what fascinates me. Is that the first part of some of the story, so much had been planned, but then this sort of quantum leap in his performance came through such a random opportunity. A club struggling financially in a different code, somebody else getting injured, seeing it on TV, being opportunistic, responding to that, and suddenly you're away.
I feel I'm still driven. I don't know what it is or what's how this is in my DNA, whatever it is. I'm so inspired by opportunities to gain respect from people, and certainly gain respect from people where it might not be the normal thing that I would do. You know, it might be boxing down here. I want them to see that I'll train as hard as anybody. And that drives me. It drives me continuously through whatever I do. So I always look for that. And that was that perfect opportunity. And then, which meant as much as anything, I was awarded the Players' Player of the Year.
The ultimate. Peer accolade.
At London Wasps, and we just missed out on winning the title. In a year like that, that was special. So I was on cloud 9, yeah.
But again, just to explore it a little bit, if you don't mind, that says something about, or does that say something about a little bit of lack of self-confidence, that you need that approval or recognition from your peers?
Absolutely.
However much your dad boosted you and all the work you did yourself, there's still a need in there for external approval, because there's not as much internal approval as
That's right.
there might be.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think coaches, it would be unrealistic to think they could do that for everybody and mollycoddle every single player, but if they can't...
It's not mollycoddling though, is it?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's the way coaches talk about it.
Exactly, yeah.
That's their language.
That's their language.
That's the critical aspect of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, people need it, but I think the most fascinating thing about the most successful sports people is that they are able to have that conversation with themselves in a successful way, but at the most critical times.
And in terms of critical times, not necessarily from somebody that he wasn't a full England player. He captained London Wasps a few times, and he'd just say one word as things were picking up, and I was sort of continuously scoring tries from full back, which some would have argued it wasn't my natural position. Well, that was another opportunity to try and prove people wrong. But he would just be going out to the field, and he'd look at me and he'd either say, it was Mark Denny, and he'd look at me and he'd say, awesome, and what he meant by that was, you just keep it going. That was last week. Keep it going, stay on it. Or he'd look at me and just go, same again. Just a couple of words from somebody that was captain. And
what a difference that made to you. You'd
it's ridiculous.
Sprint onto the field because of that.
Yeah, you'd be bouncing.
Yeah.
And so, it was coaches I think they do a lot more to try and approach each player individually. I'd like to think so. I don't know, but I'd like to think so now in the professional era. And if they're not, then obviously other people are. And I think
I'm jumping right to the end of this conversation. I mean, we can fill in the gaps, but isn't that experience going to make you a fantastically sensitive coach? I mean, is that I genuinely don't know whether that...
I hope so.
Because you should be... You
know, he's got so much to offer.
Haven't you got a lot to offer? Because you could find people like you...
Now you two have said it, I might have to go after them and do that now.
But we give you lots of approval. But I mean, just that lovely stuff from Denny?
Yeah, Mark Denny. Yeah.
Centre. He was a centre.
He was a centre, that's right.
And just those little words to drop in, because he just read you perfectly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And gave you that. Well, you've got that eye because you would see Samos around the place and know to intervene in that subtle way that makes all the difference.
Yeah. That sort of... I don't know. I've obviously inherited it from my dad. I'd love to be in a position to help, young players, young athletes. In terms of actually coaching, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure yet, but in some capacity, I'd like to be.
Well, it's using something which might be characterised as, what do you call it, namby-pamby or something? Mollycoddling. As a deficit, and turning it actually into a real asset, a real strength, a quality that people could get a huge amount from. Anyway, I'm not here to persuade you to do that.
Performance is what it's all about, and if Clive Woodward spoke about percentages. Maybe that is an area, like something that anyone should look into, coaches should look into, and that's looking at the individuals.
Yeah.
We've seen it with players like Danny Cipriani, that dips and peaks and troughs, and different characters. Well, these different characters all deserve, all the opportunities if they're good enough. To think that certain players may not remain in the game because of a clash of personalities or because they haven't been looked after is quite sad, but it does happen, and we still see it today.
Sure.
Well, I think what we're touching on here is the importance not just of the right words, but actually who they come from. So the credibility of a specific person, if they mean a lot to you, like your dad meant a great deal to you, certain player means a lot to you. So when he says something, or when you feel that you may have let them down in some way, then that's a very powerful thing. So it's not about how much people say to you, sometimes it's about how little people say. But I think listening to your story today is very much around your sensitivity. But I think that can be converted into wisdom over time, where you can be more sensitive in a coaching, mentoring role to what other people may need. And that might be the very thing that can just create either a slight uplift in someone's game or a complete transformation in someone's performance.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the whole challenge of top sport, which is about how we help people to transition from one level or one place to the next, but also how we help people just to dissolve the obstacle that's actually blocking their progress, and it's normally an internal one. So I think the fact that you've been able to see how some of the challenges that you've faced in your career have been largely internal for you, and yes, you may have clashed with certain people, but the reality of it was because of stuff that was happening to you in your life. I think you can, be a huge resource for other people. And I hope you continue to look at that as time goes on, because the life beyond sport is very challenging. That's another transition which professional sports people have to make. And I think some people try to rush into that coaching role, they're trying to rush into the next stage very quickly. But it's only really by taking a bit of time out and doing other things, and I know you're very committed to family and your personal training, and really sort of getting some experience from other walks of life. But I think when someone then comes back to the sport, because it's not a job, it's because they feel they've got a contribution to make, and plus the connections you've got and the influence that people like Sean Edwards have had over you, and playing under Warren Gatland and these really experienced people, means the credibility with which you've got to offer people based on that accumulation of that vast experience is huge. So I think in terms of sort of finishing up our piece today, I mean, I think yours has been a really fascinating story in terms of your journey through sport. One of massive achievement as a youngster, real aspiration and not quite working out, and then having to manage all those transitions with injury and things not quite working out. But ultimately, I think potentially the richest part of your story could actually be between the ages of, say, 45 and 75, in terms of being able to contribute in a really meaningful way to other people who are looking to undergo a successful journey through sport themselves. So really just in terms of closing our piece today, I just want to say thank you for sharing the intimacy of your story, and also thank you for the wonderful work you do with us at London County Mentoring in terms of helping other young professional sports people.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you.